Well, welcome back, everyone. I want to do a quick recap of our goals and where we were in our first session, and then an overview of what our goal is for this this next 90-minute session. So the opportunity is to reimagine public issues leadership development, and the great thing about that is it's not broken. And so one of the options is to do process improvement and carry on, but there's some provocative, perhaps, opportunities to make it even more impactful. So that's what we have been exploring. And some of those Lila put out on the wait, why are we doing this again? And we heard that, the question about the time of the year led then to the investment in a more framework and philosophical discussion, knowing that at the federal level and with budgets and so on, whatever is done must be very thoughtful and wise and impactful. And so that's why we have this great committee to think it through in that way. And then Bob did a great job of holding to 2 pages with a history document with some of the milestones and the pivot places where the PILD conference has been in the past. And I was thinking of my own personal story. I don't know what year it was, but I was serving on our Extension Dean and Director's Citizens Advisory Committee. And it was at the time when they felt having a state specialist, a county educator, and a program leader, along with mostly citizens of the state, was beneficial so that we could help either interpret or share our perspectives and so on, in addition to the administrative messages. And so I just thought in my introduction and said I have been to PILD, and I appreciated it, but it was prior to 2012 for those numbers showing up. So again, lots of good work in the rearview mirror, and the question is, what about the next 5 years, and how can we make it especially and continuingly meaningful? We can skip that. So I like to start a facilitated conversation without too many leading questions, just to check in with people on their thinking and where they're at. And so we had a round robin pretty much of discussion on this part. And it was from that and these next more specific questions that I did your quick notes that I sent to you via the same email that Bob had used to announce this webinar. So we'll get to that in a minute. And a reminder of the statement of purpose. And I literally ran out of time on the minutes. And so otherwise I would have put very important, we know who the readers are and what they're supposed to take away from it. So great additions from committee members. The why PILD should exist is the first summary of your notes that I sent, so we'll come back to that. The differences PILD could make were kind of, I thought, coupled in with that, so we didn't pull that out specifically, but we did spend a nice amount of time on who might best or most effectively make the difference, and then a short amount of time on what time of year. So we may need to come back to that. So with that, in terms of summary, I'd invite you to look at your notes if you're at a place where you received them. And if not, we may need to do some sharing. If someone got them and they know they can send to their colleague, because firewalls sometimes stop some of my traffic. I'm sure you could get them from Bob. So I want to just pause and see, is there anybody who didn't receive an email with a set of notes? And I'm going to put Bob on the spot. If you got them, Bob, if you could then send to those people.
Donna, this is Karen London, and I did not receive your email.
Anybody else?
So you did, Bob, and you'd be able to get it to Karen?
Yeah, I'll do it here in a minute.
Okay, great.
Donna Ray, you are on mute. Donna Ray, you're on mute.
There I go. I knew I'd do that at least 3 times. Thank you, Lila. So the big whys, the first page in my quick hour, I was trying to take your language and words from your sharing and cluster like ideas. And I'm fully aware that there could be a different sense of clustering. However, with my experience with facilitation and group dialogue, I think I try to pull out things that how you would plan something would be quite different based on what that would be. And my other thought is, as we look at these, you of course can have a couple big whys, but I don't find it useful to just have too many all under one big tent, because I think then that does not give focus or clear purpose. And so I came up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And PILD as a train the trainer isn't quite a why, it's more of a how or a what, but it seemed in that conversation a central thought. So definitely people spoke to the word advocacy, and we understood that as education toward advocacy and some of the intricacies based on different states. Then this cluster, right now I'm just labeling federal level involvement for impact, because there was quite a few of you who talked about gaining knowledge or understanding or skills that included things about our federal partners, NEFA, ECOP, and so on, as well as Congress and so on. So that's the best, or the label I came up with there. And then some of you spoke very specifically to the notion of legislative impact, and that this being very relevant in understanding that, and perhaps that can be coupled with funding. But if the frame on funding is not just federal funding, but it's funding at your state and local level, some of you spoke to the full system, not just that federal level. So I pulled out funding. The comment, I think, from maybe Karen in Maryland was that the excitement or the recharge, the building upon an army, and I thought that was useful to understand. You've got people who've been through PILD, and how are they involved, as well as the new class that would be coming, and what then are you trying to do for them. But that was a attitudinal one. And a couple of others said, you have to clarify your boundaries. What is it that you know at the national level, and who is able to speak on behalf of what? So I think buried under the excitement or the recharge of maybe becoming that advocate is the notion of speaking with confidence, and how that might apply to volunteers or end users of programs and so on might be different than it would apply to a county-based educator or a new director and so on. And then we had what I noted in my listening as kind of policy engagement. And to me, that's broader perhaps than advocacy. And the sense there, and Allie, I think some of this came from you, is that we may do it now, but how could we do it more intentionally, and how could we align it with other policy engagement parts within our system? And then we had that theme of really the leadership development, and perhaps those who are selected for these teams may see that as a leadership development opportunity, perhaps with skill building training, those kinds of pieces that they gain personal and individual skills in order to be a better leader themselves. So I would open it up for comments and questions about the comments and the clustering, and again, very open to refinement for my quick turnaround on this. So who'd like to go first?
Donna, this is Tony, and I just find it interesting that all the comments that were collected and things we talked about during the first 2 hours. If you'll all take a minute and go to the JSEP website and look under handbook and then strategic plan. So jsep.org, and then under handbook and strategic plan, one of the items under that strategic plan for 2016 to 19 was to unite cooperative extension's efforts for advocating and influencing policymakers at local, state, and federal levels. And all of the bulleted items there really match up nicely with the discussion that we just had within the last 2 hours. I just thought that was kind of neat.
It is. Sometimes stars align. Other comments? Are we okay to live with these notes as we our next challenge is going to be to couple some ideas and come up with some scenarios, and then in fact speak on behalf perhaps or advocate for certain of these whys that would be more important to you than others of them. So just want to affirm that this is a close approximation of the conversation we had in the first work portion of the work session.
Yeah, Donna Ray, this is Lila. This is very helpful, I think, and it is a good summary from my perspective. To me, it seems like a bit of a combination between whys and hows, and which I think we did in our conversation as well. And so, for example, I could see advocating and funding and perhaps leadership development, perhaps some more. Those to me really may be wise. You know, how we do that in terms of the, you know, involvement at the federal level, policy engagement, those kinds of things, train the trainer, seem, or perhaps could be more hows. But to me, it's a good summary of our conversation. Yeah.
And anyone else just on the notes? Okay, then let's go to the next page of the notes, which is the who might best make this difference. And here's where my thought process really went into tension points or trade-offs. So, for example, I believe that at the committee level, you could finally articulate the who, or you could leave that to states who want to form their teams, and then you could just observe how many are volunteers who come and how many are other ways. So I think there's a level of specificity or tension points in this one. I think with the recipients of resources perhaps, and then as someone pointed out, the extension administrators and or other extension directors, being really clear whether they're part of who you're marketing to and really want in attendance. To me, the volunteer number, where that rubs is those who come and get into a professional extension culture of sharing where they do not feel a part of it. You know, there needs to be a certain, I think, number of a constituent group in order to feel fully engaged. So I will pause on the different categories of who, and again, these aren't to say that we pick one or that it isn't a blend, but it is to note the different types you brought up in the morning or the earlier conversation. So who would like to comment first?
I want to comment on the questions down on the bottom, the very first one. is it wise to make PILD more than a one and done, and how? And I guess one thing that had kind of came to me is, the folks that go back to the conference, when they go to the legislature to educate the legislators, they are educated themselves by the legislators and that process. And we talked about the fact that some directors are there and showing their support. And I'm wondering if we did or encouraged or part of the training that we did, if we encourage those participants to go back and actively engage with their administration to share with them what they got out of that, in their Hill visits or the conference itself, and be willing to help to train others in their states to be able to multiply that effect. That's kind of something that Extension's always been about, is, we train others to train others. And maybe if we were a little more successful in doing that, there might be a little bit better support by some directors who have not, tasted of the wine themselves.
Two comments on that is that I believe we started with a good example of what could be called a resource kit that perhaps the PILD committee could make available. So, for example, the report form that one state has when people have been on the Hill and had those contacts, what they would fill out and then share that with their director or whoever would be the relevant person. So in addition to sponsoring a conference, I thought this idea of some sort of a resource sharing, and that's a vague idea for those who want to do some of those things. So that builds off more on your first comment, Bob. I do think a pivot point would be, if you do go, train the trainer as a primary why, because then how you would support that and who would be on the teams perhaps would be very different. Other comments on the note taking on the potential who?
I have a quick comment. I'm sorry, I'm having some difficulties with my internet, so I keep turning the video off so it works better. But I don't see on here the general extension professional. I mean, we have the JSEP teams, but why could our audience not be just our general extension professional? I know that here, as I mentioned, here in Oregon, the associations help pay for their president or vice president, whichever association it is, to attend PILD, but why couldn't anybody else attend if their county was willing to pay for it, or if they were willing to pay for it themselves? So I don't see the general extension professional noted on here.
And that's a large portion of the audience, the general extension professional. And I think, as we have with our leadership conference, PILD, we've tend to de-emphasize that you have to be in a leadership role to attend this, and that it is open and would be a benefit to any of the extension professionals.
Thank you for that. And that was, so I think my head was saying that somewhere at the state level, there is the pull together of a team, and the general extension professionals would be part of that team. But it does lead to the question, are there people who attend the conference who do not have any state, they're not coordinated with anybody else from their state team? Or would most of them come and know who else is coming from their state?
No, I would say most of them don't know who the other people, I mean, they sort of do because they kind of seek each other out, but it's not planned. I would say the majority of them do not have something planned coming to this conference, especially as our volunteer numbers have gone down. Maybe that used to occur. It doesn't happen anyway in New York. And people are scrambling before they come to the conference going, who's going to the conference? You going? Who are the other association? And I almost, as some of this train the trainer, just like what Lynette was saying, could some of this train the trainer stuff be done at the conference? Meaning like, it's late at night or, an evening, and saying, hey, who would like to help facilitate a couple discussion groups tomorrow on, how to do this appropriately for your region or something like that? And could we take advantage of on-site training and building those? Because we have such a wide range of experiences that people come here, anywhere from nobody's ever been here and they're only been an extension for, say, 5 years, to those who have been an extension for 30 years and maybe have been here 5 times already. How could we take advantage of that expertise that might even be in the room, and that might actually build it for the future as well?
I would just second what Beth said. I don't think that most of the people have an organized group that comes forward. I'd say it's at least half.
So let us put general extension professional in that open line on our notes. And that's why we're looking over the notes. Very good, helpful.
Actually, I think it's good that we add the general extension professional, but I would put them in the category of the state level team. In other words, I think when you go back to your individual states, you want to have some kind of a coordinated effort as a team of people. You don't want people out there kind of doing their own independent thing. And so they may not come to PILD knowing who their team members are or being familiar with who else is coming, but we create those teams while we're at PILD. And so I'd be really hesitant to create sort of this open category that says, and y'all can come, anybody can come, and by the way, you don't have to be connected to your team at all. I think once you get to PILD, regardless of whether you've had any interaction with your team prior to coming to PILD or not, once you get to PILD, you should be planning together as a group. And so you become a part of the team.
And maybe that comes back to the toolbox. What's in the toolbox that we give people either prior to coming to PILD or at PILD that would help them be cohesive, that help them come together and have the goal to actually do something as a result of being here.
This is Holly. I guess I agree and disagree with the discussion. One, I agree because in Florida, at least, we have a designated team who we know who those people are that are coming to, go to the Hill and talk to our legislators. But we also have had other people in Extension who have submitted abstracts and have presented, and they're not necessarily people who are going to be going with that team to the Hill, but they're still participating in PILD and getting something out of it. So I think I see benefit in both of those, and I don't think we should limit people who maybe aren't part of the team to say you can't attend, but that might also go back to the why PILD. So if our why is that we want you to come and learn about educating, your legislators, if you aren't going to the Hill, then, maybe think about becoming part of that team to go to the Hill, I guess. I guess I wouldn't want to limit people who aren't part of that team or know that there is a team to not attend, because they might still benefit from the information at PILD.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Cutting people out, well, not so much cutting them out, but not marketing to them. I guess that's one reason I've never been to the PILD conference. And I think it's just because I was never asked to go, because I always saw it as something like you had to be invited to do. So I don't know if you want to break out of that and show people that it's open to everybody, because you're going to get something out of it whether you go to the Hill or not.
So this is Allie Mitchell. I think this is a really important conversation because, just like the previous speaker said, it's getting at that why PILD of it all. If this is going to be a conference that is tailored for a unique purpose and delivers on that purpose, then necessarily it will not be for everybody. Because it can't. Because if it's trying to be for everybody, then it will do nothing well. At least that's my way of thinking about trainings and conferences. A way to get at maybe what Elaine was saying, that you don't want to exclude people because they don't feel like they're welcome, is at the start of day one, for example, essentially doing an everybody stand up, locations for universities around the room. You get to meet the people who are there with your team, who are there from your university, who are a part of that team, whether you thought you were, whether you want to be or not, because that's what advocacy is. That's what educating on the Hill is. That's what being part of this policy system is. And we're going to make that happen immediately. It sort of gets at maintaining the integrity of PILD, if PILD is going to have a specific goal, which I think it should have, and not sort of excluding people for the sake of them not understanding what PILD was. Although I think if somebody who's coming to PILD and doesn't know what the point is, then they didn't read the material and that's their fault.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to get somebody who's going to go that is just going, because people don't have that kind of money just laying around. But anybody who's interested in learning how to speak with decision makers and the people who hold the purse strings and doing those elevator speeches, I think everybody can get something out of it if they're interested in coming and connecting them to be a part of the team.
And yes, and so I think I hear a couple things. One is, if our why drives us, perhaps leadership development and training is a chance for people who are JSEP reps at their state level. Maybe their great excitement is meeting other people and learning from them and using their skills at home. And maybe the advocacy on the Hill is not their goal, or is a small part of it. So I do think we haven't figured out yet what the big why is, but that's where we're going, is trying to link conceptually some of these together. And for me, it was useful. I think too, Elaine, you brought up the invited versus open, and then for a purpose. And I want to just note that on the who now, because I heard two people say we might lose participation if we target it too specifically. So one would be really clear on tight purpose and goals, self-selection, and then once people select, organize within a state and support in that way. And then there could be some other models with that. Anything else in terms of the who that we want to collectively put into our notes? And we will come back to some of those key questions as we develop our scenarios.
The thing that kind of keeps coming up is advocacy or education of federal legislators, and it was just mentioned that I think Elaine and Holly both made the point. This is about education and advocacy for decision makers. We tend to focus on the federal people because we're there. I don't know about the rest of you, but when I retired from Extension in Idaho, we got 8% of our dollars from the federal government. We got 92% of our dollars from the state government and from local county government. Now, if we had to take a 10% cut, we could lose everything in the federal government, and it wouldn't hurt us any as bad as if we lost 10% out of our state and local. So I think it's important that, and reaching beyond those people who are not there to visit with the federal people, we need to help everybody to be able to visit with and impact decision makers at those lower levels as well.
I think I'm going to take that as a transition comment, and your group has raised those transition comments beautifully to get to the next section. I'm going to hold on time, and we have notes about that, but I believe that might be a secondary decision that can come later after the purpose is vetted and the who. So many of you are familiar with scenario development. It was it is the idea of taking a couple important factors and then combining them in ways that you get various possibilities. If I'm working with a community-based group, I sometimes use the game Clue, because indeed that's kind of what scenarios are. You're looking for the person in the dining room with the wrench who is whatever. And so it's the combining of various elements. And so I have 4 spaces here on the screen, and we may have more scenarios than that. I want to just get your brain rolling on coming in as a guest and facilitator on a couple that I think I heard. So in scenario planning, your status quo is usually your first option, not your preferred option, just your first option. And I just call that the rinse and repeat, which means things are going fairly well. We learned from our evaluation last time, and we're going to do it in a very similar fashion. So that's the status quo. I believe another one that emerged was what Bob was just talking about, and I'm going to use, I think, Karen from Maryland, your words, and I'm going to call this option A scenario, if you want to jot it there on your notes from earlier. Arm the CES Army. And on that one, I believe we've heard and seen support for this notion of advocacy to decision makers. And we can fine tune whether that's the practice would be with federal if you're in DC, but as the point was just made, state funding, local funding is also important. So I'm going to just for now call option A, arm the CES Army. And we know that it talks about advocacy for decision makers. Another option, and I'm again just trying to get us started and then turn it to you for what you hear, I'm going to call it Policy Base Camp. And for option B, a scenario that I've heard is at least a portion, if not all, of PILD could be for the team who would take seriously, learn skills, do advocacy, but also put a greater emphasis on share back, train the trainer. So not just doers for advocacy, but educators for advocacy coming out of a policy base camp. So there, I got us started on a couple of them. And before we go too deep on other ones, I want to turn it to you to what other scenarios are you seeing arising for PILD out of the discussion, or as you think about powering up this for the future? Who'd like to start?
So I'll start off. It's not necessarily another scenario, but I guess my concern before we start going in and developing what these scenarios are is that one of the voices that is not included, and maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not sure that we have heard from our extension directors as to what direction PILD needs to go. And the bottom line is, either people are going to be paying for this out of their pocket, they're going to be paying for it through association funds, or they're going to be paying for it out of dollars that are available through their director's office in order to attend. And so my guess is most of the funding is probably going to come from directors' offices. And so before we start going down a path too far of determining what PILD is going to look like in the future, I think we need to know what the directors are willing to fund and what they think it should look like.
Bob or Lila, we discussed sort of engagement and taking out some options for input and review. And at planning, at least, and was that you, Tony? What I was informed was that perhaps shaping up a couple options and taking that would be preferred to ground zero engagement. And so the work session is trying to see if there's a couple that we might prefer and land on, or maybe we'll have a set of them from which an engagement process could commence prior to any decisions being made about preferred option by your committee, chaired by Karen, at an upcoming meeting. So Bob or Lila, do you want to maybe address Tony's question in addition to my understanding from the planning conversation?
Yeah, sorry, my phone's going nuts and I'm at home and I don't really know how to turn it off. But anyhow, what you described, Donna Ray, is exactly right. I think what we need to do is look at the option. Hold on just a second. Yeah, okay. And anyhow, look at some potential options, and then I think we have a couple of strategies that we need to utilize in order to advance those. One of the reasons that I had hoped that John Boren could be a part of this conversation is because he is he's the extension director who chairs the ECOP Budget and Legislative Committee. And I know that he's been very interested in this and in where PILD ultimately goes, or what the future of PILD is. So I think that getting John on board with 2, 3, 4, whatever scenarios that he could present to ECOP. ECOP is basically the board of directors for the extension directors across the nation. There are 3 extension directors from each region that are on that group. And I think it would be valuable for John to be able to take this information to ECOP for some discussion. I can also help get this out to extension directors by utilizing my colleague regional executive directors and have some conversations with them about this so that they can have conversations with when their regional directors meet to discuss this. Another thing that I actually was thinking about during our break is I did try to call Jim Richards from Cornerstone. I have a message into him asking him to call me because I'd like to talk with him about this sort of the year-round advocacy approach and what makes sense in terms of timing. But next week I'll be at a meeting where I'll see both Jim and probably Doug Steele, the vice president for Ag and Natural Resources at APLU. Doug is also very interested in this, and I will likely see the new NIFA director. And so there are a number of people that I'll see next week, that Allie and I will both see next week, where we can have conversations, at least beginning conversations with them about this. I don't think this is, I think you're right, Donna Ray, this is not necessarily, we're not going to end today with a decision, but I think if we have 2 or more options that we can present to directors and then get their feedback and get their input. If they don't like the options, they're not going to be shy about telling us about that. But I think it is important to get their input so that we're building something that is in fact supportive of all of Extension and that they can support.
This is Allie Mitchell. All right, couple things. First, missing from these scenarios is much of the conversation about exposing extension professionals to the entire universe of cooperative extension and making sure that they understand the diversity of extension work outside of their JSEP member organization. The director question. I understand that it is important for each state's extension director to buy into PILD because they are going to fund, potentially fund, hopefully fund folks coming. I would at the same time be wary about giving the wheel to the car you're trying to drive to somebody who isn't the people you're really trying to serve. This is your organization and your meeting. And while you need, potentially might decide that you need buy-in, it's still yours and it still should serve the purposes that you want it to serve. So just be wary of directors making different choices from what you want them to make. If you give them the reins, they get to do with it what they will. I don't expect that means that it'll go off the rails. It's something to be wary of as you move forward. But echoing Lila, happy to usher through any ideas and options, concerns. Offering the space for them to provide feedback is probably a smart frame, as opposed to giving them sort of a decision-making capability on this. I'm going to stop there because I think I've said my piece and I'll just overcomplicate by talking more.
Thanks, Allie and Lila. So 2 things. One is with these scenarios, once we have a few headlines, we're going to go back to those big whys and plot in those spaces. For example, would the understanding the federal system fit with one or both of those? Following up on the question about the involvement and JSEP driving this and the interesting starting conversation about how it aligns with your strategic plan, I'm just going to put it out there, and I didn't wait very long, but I'll just put it out there that I believe JSEP could say we are interested in a role in budget formation as well as support. And I'm not sure. Again, we're looking at possibilities, and at the end of our time today, you may back away from that. But John was here briefly at the beginning, Lila. So we saw his smiling face, and he's, as far as I know, no longer here. But that would be a provocative option, and I would send that back to JSEP members in regard to their thoughts and whether or not you want to have another option that we would plot here having to do with federal level extension budget formation and support or something like that.
Just a comment, JSEP does have a seat at the table. Our president-elect also serves on that budget and legislative committee and has for a number of years. And I feel pretty confident over the years, the people that have served in that role have felt very comfortable that the committee does give credence to the information that they bring forward. So I think we have a seat at the table. That's important.
So this is Tony again, and so it sounds to me like from what I've heard both this morning as well as or earlier before the break as well as after the break, and keeping in mind that JSEP's purpose is to provide professional development, across all parts of extension, that we really are looking at a couple of different scenarios. One scenario would be to have PILD focused on a train-the-trainer basis where there is a specified team from each state that would come in. That team may be made up of a combination of extension professionals as well as volunteers, or it may be one or the other, but regardless, the purpose would be to train those individuals on advocacy, and then they would go back to their using the Capitol Hill as a hands-on approach to do so. But then their goal then or expectation would be to go back to their state and deliver that same type of training to others, whether it be extension professionals or volunteers, on how to do advocacy within their local community and their state. The other option then would be to have a "here y'all come" type of invitation, open to anyone, still having it on advocacy, but not necessarily with as much of a defined purpose as what the train the trainer approach would be. So that's kind of the two scenarios that I heard today.
So just again, trying to use language, I would then suggest that option B, Tony, is what I was thinking about for the train the trainer. I just, in a scenario kind of based way, called it, policy base camp, where you'd go to the base, a team would go there, get the supplies, and then they would go and distribute those to other teams. But really the core purpose would be train the trainer. And we can, again, start plotting out these two options. And then I would say A is that education and advocacy toward decision makers. And so that is what we could just call option A, education and advocacy toward decision makers. Let me call one more time if there's any other scenarios that are arising, and I'll leave a little bit of time. Otherwise, we'll start diving deeper in these options using the big Y's kind of categories to define what it might include in the purpose for each of those two options. So I'm gonna pause and see if there's any other big options anybody wants to put forward for consideration. And again, we're mapping it today, and not necessarily saying that this is what we all love. We are gonna end by where do you see support to go forward with one or more. But sometimes the creative thinking then can get a real element powered up in a couple of the other scenarios.
One thing, go ahead.
Donna Ray, I think the other option that I heard from Tony was simply hosting a y'all come, if you will, leadership development training. And there's no particular, I mean, you come for your own professional development. It might well focus on advocacy and working with back home with county commissioners or whatever, whoever your supporters are, whoever you're trying to influence at home. But it's essentially a y'all come kind of professional development opportunity. That was the other option that I think I heard Tony voice.
Okay, I'll go back to Tony. If so, let's call it option C, the leadership development, as that being the compelling scenario headline. Tony, would that feel good to you, that that's an additional separate option?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much what we're doing now, essentially with Build. Sometimes we throw leadership in there, sometimes we throw advocacy in there, but it's really we're doing it with a defined purpose, but yet there's not a defined expectation. Whereas one with the train the trainer group, there is a defined expectation.
The one thing that came to my mind in what Tony said is, if we did a train the trainer for advocacy, for example, education/advocacy, one aspect of that is we could do that anywhere. That wouldn't have to be done in Washington, D.C., and that's one of the things that has come up frequently in evaluation. Is Washington, D.C. is a wonderful place to go, but it's certainly not the most economical place to go.
Thank you,
That
Bob,
is-
for that.
Sorry. Yeah, especially for those of us from the western half of the U.S. It's a long, expensive haul out there, and you know, for a small state, you know, I was thrilled to have 2 other colleagues go along. So that was it's yeah, that's just something to consider.
So if I'm hearing you right, option A is that we are very much status quo. We're training people to go out there and be more effective advocates for cooperative extension. Option B is we are training people to bring the message back so they can train advocates. And option C is that we are providing leadership training to build leaders, including but not limited to advocacy. Am I getting this right?
I think that was a good restatement and a wonderful bridge. So if you go back to your notes, we can take some of these scenarios, A, B, and C, and plot them to the left. So C, I believe we're on the same page that it's leadership development and training, but it could also include some of these other components. So that's where we're going, is if we get kind of the primary direction, it may involve some others. I believe that the policy engagement and the train the trainer, option B, perhaps is policy engagement. So we could put that there now, and also and A perhaps is a combination of advocates and the federal level, or A, advocates, and then the impacting the legislative. So let's open it up, because there would be different ways to combine these. So under option A, which is primarily the education and advocacy toward decision makers, which of these big Ys might fit in there? Again, with the choices of advocates, federal level involvement for impact the legislative proposal, funding, and so on. So some of these will fit in some of these and not in others. So that's what we're trying to press for. So what would option A include?
Well, it might include advocates, federal level, the impacts of legislative proposals, policy engagement, funding.
Yeah, and I think that one, as Tony or someone said, it fits with your strategic plan, which is why PILD now perhaps does many of these things. And so then with the committee, just trying to say what would be more potent or powerful out of those set. So let's leave that for now and move to option B, which is train the trainer. So that would be the last one, PILD as train the trainer. And then I will leave it to a committee person to suggest what else might be key elements in this train the trainer idea.
So my one thought, this is Elaine Toretta from Jersey. My one thought is building on that research of James Garbarino from New York, where you do the cognitive restructuring and then have opportunities for rehearsal. So as a way of making change within people through the professional development. So when people say, well, why DC? Because it's so far away, we all have in common the federal government. And what we don't have in common then are the states and then the counties. So if we do this at the national level with the education and the opportunity for rehearsal going on the Hill to practice what we have just been exposed to, that reinforces the ability then to go back to your states with a team and kind of do the same thing at the state level, with the opportunity then to do that with state legislators. So having that structure where we all have the common input, or the common denominator at the federal government, I think that's a really great model for what you had said is arm the CES Army.
Yeah, Elaine, that's a really good point. That's a good clarification. I don't mean to say that I don't want to go to DC. It's just it needs to be to kind of make sense time-wise and financially. And if it's if I get to practice new and innovative, new techniques in that vein on the Hill, then I can bring that back more confidently to the state, and that does make it worth it. So that's a good point. Thanks for the for that. Yeah.
No problem.
Is the practice in regard to the funding, or is the practice in regard to relationships and sharing stories of impact? So just trying to see if in scenario B, the train the trainer, what would the practice be on, would you see?
Well, the being able to take, so if you have this workshop where you're learning that, being able to be comfortable and talking with legislators and people who, hold those purse strings. And then, so you have those kind of workshops, then you go to the Hill and you kind of talk about, and you employ all those things that you learned in the workshop. So it's actually just relationship building and, keeping it short and sweet, get to the point, and then, drop your bomb of what you want or what you're looking for, and then, wrapping it up and leaving. That's something that, you can talk about doing, but until you've actually gone through it and had a chance to practice that, I think that's what you would need the practice with. And it works for just about anything you're learning how to do, as long as you can employ it pretty recent, fairly, I think these, I don't know what the research says as far as the timeline, but if you employ it fairly recently after you've learned it, you're most likely able to retain it.
Thank you. Then my key question would be is that PILD with the cognitive restructuring and the practice could do that, sharing stories of impact, and they could be legislative proposal neutral, or they could be part of the group that has had the training in order to speak on behalf of the federal budget. And if you are not speaking on behalf of the federal budget, it opens up quite more in your time frame. And it also might impact who you're training, because I'd heard earlier the volunteers are one of your best ways to speak on behalf of the budget. So just a follow-up question to hear your thoughts about option A, as whether the federal budget is part of it, or it wouldn't necessarily have to be in order to have the full learning, I believe. So comments about that one?
I guess
Important to make sure that the federal budget is in fact a part of it, because you don't really have, I'm not sure this is accurate. I was going to say you don't really have the federal budget unless you have state budget. There is a one-to-one match, I guess. And so if you have federal budget, then you have to have state budget. You don't have to have federal budget. But there's no particular reason to not, I guess. So I would think that you'd want to have the federal budget as being a part of it, because it helps you put in context the whole.
I guess my initial thought about that was the fact that that those of us out, out in the counties and the districts and areas and whatnot have little influence on the budget. The value that I would think that we have in being involved in the process is to validate the request that is made by our federal partner to show that, in fact, what they're asking the legislature to fund is, in fact, benefiting the people out in the field.
For clarification, the federal partner never asks for money. The federal partner is not allowed to ask for a certain amount from Congress.
Then who does?
Stakeholders across the country. As far as I know, unless somebody fix me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, Congress responds to the president's budget and shows how it would be implemented across, and only provides information to Congress upon request. At least was the case when I was in the Department of Transportation. It might not be the same in NIFA.
Yeah, we do provide a request for funding, and that is through the president's budget.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, and so much of the information that we get from the cooperative extension system, both reporting and also through your comm shops, helps us to justify that federal budget. And many times, as you said, Allie, we are asked for stories and information from the Hill on, okay, so what does this really do? And we will respond to that. We won't go up there advocating to the Hill, advocating for something that's other than the president's budget. We do darn little advocating now, but there is some. But we do ask Congress for funds in the form of the president's budget.
So thank you for that clarification, and that's probably part of the workshop on understanding the roles at the federal level and who does what. So just trying to plot this, and because of the Zoom, if I'm going to just tell you my notes that I'm looking at, that I believe for option A, that I've heard a case that that includes advocates. It includes something on the federal level involvement and the impact legislative proposals and funding included in that option. I'd say the excitement and the recharge is a good reminder. That's probably in all of them as an outcome of the convening and the gathering, but also some in the policy engagement. And so what's left out of option A is just the leadership development and training, and that becomes the lead idea for our option C. And what also is left out is PILD as train the trainer, unless there's some creative thinking about how to add a day or something like that. So any other thoughts about what in the purpose statement would be included in this? Arm the CS Army, the education and advocacy toward decision makers for extension. Okay, let's go to B then. And to me, B, again, the lead line is train the trainer, PILD as train the trainer. And then coming in secondarily is the several of the items in A, that your federal level of involvement, you're going to practice with impacting the legislative proposal, you're going to make the ask for the federal budget, and that quite a bit of it is going to be more of a skill building scenario around the policy engagement and getting ready to do those tasks. And the question would be whether you believe in option B, that being an advocate and being a skilled train the trainer can be accomplished together, or one's in part A or part B, or I think that would be something the committee would want to talk about in terms of outcomes. So comments on option B. Option B also leaves out leadership development and training, and at least it seems like it puts in a secondary position the advocate, because in the primary position is the train the trainer. The comments on option B, purpose.
This is Karen. With option B, the advocator, a lot of extension professionals do, when we talking to our legislators, it's more of education versus being the advocator. So we have to walk a very thin line, not being advocators, but being educators or informers. So option B, we may have to be a little careful how we position that, since we've opened it up to professionals and all.
Thank you. Let's just change that to educator. And then I think in my mind, the differential on option B is that a train the trainer role may be primary to being an advocate, where you would be spending your time doing testimony and relationship building and so on. And you may need to do some of that in order to be an excellent trainer, or you may choose and PILD to bring forth people who already have knowledge of educating and the federal level and so on as your train the trainer, but or educator. Other comments on option B, kind of what in terms of purpose is being held up, and then what it would mean you would not get to as a purpose.
So with the Extension Disaster Education Network conference, we have like pre and post trainings. I wonder if this train the trainer idea might be like a post conference, or like a training the day after PILD is already visited the Hill and all that. And perhaps it's not the entire group of people, but maybe it's certain members of each state team. I'm not sure. Just a thought.
Other thoughts on that?
I had the same thought, Lynette, that may be a way to accomplish a couple of goals there, to do the train the trainer the day before, the day after, whatever, and then have it more open for those who are there for a general approach rather than strictly the trainer.
Others on that same thought?
I like that idea.
So that is combining options, which is what creative people do. And so we're going to hold on that with the idea of structuring to be able to get more of these outcomes realized. And then I bet when we go to option C, which is the leadership development one, that someone's going to say that one could be the other track while others are in the train the trainer. But maybe I'm just getting a little goofy here on a Friday afternoon late in the day. But let's plot option C, which is your leadership development and training. It's your wide open option. It includes states being able to select people who they may want in a role of significance in their state to be able to learn about the federal level and so on. And so this is the one where so far I only have C on leadership development and training. So I want to pass it to a committee member for you to walk through the big Ys, advocates, federal level, and propose which ones you think might fit that leadership development and training heading. So who'd like to do that?
I just want to make a comment that everyone may or may not be aware of. We also, as JSEP, have a leadership development conference in February. So that doesn't mean that one time a year is enough for leadership development, but it probably needs to be focused. The leadership training in this one would need to be focused in an area that is at least different than the one that we have in February.
And given the big
I was going to bring that same thing up, Bob.
we focus on educator advocacy for policy and the federal level and so on. Or maybe someone familiar with that could see what an option C leadership training, not necessarily, although could be held in Washington, D.C., which of the big ideas or the big whys would not be duplicating it. Or maybe we just want to say option C, we believe already exists. It could be tweaked since it's under your JSEP umbrella, but we don't want to map it here as part of the future scenarios. So I'd listen to someone who's knowledgeable about that other leadership development conference.
One of the things that occurs to me is that it actually could be, you could have a track at the Leadership Development Conference that focuses on this and perhaps focuses on advocacy. The other thing that occurs to me is this is something that would benefit many extension directors and administrators. And I could see them perhaps getting behind a singularly focused, if you will, workshop or training opportunity around funding in general and advocating for the advocacy process for funding that could have some focus on federal, could have some focus on what goes on within the states and sharing with each other, and then also locally. And so I could see this going in a number of different directions that would be very different than what we have as our current PILD, but it may well be another option or opportunity.
So I'm going to label that option D, which puts the directors that we talked about as a primary audience, and that would focus on federal level involvement and funding. And that may or may not intersect with PILD as you know it now, but is as you talked about incoming and so on, there might be an interest area there.
Yeah, I'd call it something like funding in the federal process or something like that. Or the federal funding process. Being successful in the federal funding process. I don't know, something like that.
Allie, any comment on that one? Not necessarily the words, but just with the directors you work with and other administrators, a sense of it as a marketable item sponsored by JSEP?
I'm happy to help. I think Lila captured it all.
I am watching the time and want to go to the next question, which is to see if any of these options or their combination are most strongly supported. And I started down that road a minute ago to say perhaps something called leadership development and training. We might not want to do that because of the JSEP leadership development one, but there still may be a track or something. So this is a chance for you to support from what you've heard. And if we use the option labels, it just means it can be a little bit quicker, but it can help us see from this work session which of these options that we've talked about, once we see them in writing, we'd like to move out for information, communication, testing, and so on, before you come back as a committee and choose one or couple them together. So who'd like to support an option or a combination of options from our discussion today?
In my mind, option A and option C, as we've described them, are more awareness level. conferences. Option B would not only be awareness, but also an application level. And so I you know, as a participant leaving. And so I would be more supportive of the option B as described here today than any of those.
We're gonna just try to all be on the freeway here together for the next 10 minutes. So jump right in with your thoughts about what you support. Had a great first start, and I'm taking notes, and they'll get back to you.
I like option A and B, with the thought of B potentially being like a before or after conference. And then I think with option C, I think if there was some type of track at the leadership conference that occurs in February, that would be a good option for that one.
I'll agree with the statement.
I got a sign of support there, Karen. Thank you. Well,
I think that I'll weigh in on combining option A and option D. We have a very good outline right now of going out and teaching people how to go forth and be advocates, with a focus of the federal, with the practical hands-on focus of the federal partner, but also giving people skills that can be applied to the federal, state, and local level. And I think doing as much as we can to elevate that, to do that in a leadership and professional development context, to build the future leaders of the cooperative extension system, and the present leaders of the cooperative extension system might be, I would think would be the strongest avenue for the future. I saw a lot of first-time PILD goers at the conference, and I think that over the next, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I think that we're going to have we're going to have a lot of turnover in the middle to upper to top echelon of the extension ranks, and I think as much work as we can get done, not only training these folks as advocates, but also leaders, and to bolster the finances across the system. I think as I understand it, A and D is what would do that. So I'll weigh in as a combination A and D.
thank you. Who's next?
I'll just very quickly weigh in and say I like options A and B. I'm a very big fan of tracks. So because tracks give people choices. So as long as, we can do something within those realms, I think it's going to be an awesome conference.
I would support A and B also. I think that kind of covers the areas that we really need to focus on.
So this is Lynette, and I guess my focus would be option A with, I still like the idea of like a pre or post day to cover option B. My concern with focusing totally on B is what does that do for the PILD conference in the long run? Will we be training ourselves right out of a conference? I'm not sure. Well, wouldn't that be awesome if we did? But I think option A being the focus and then having option B as for those that truly want to bring this back to their state and train individuals who cannot come to PILD at this point, but would still have this, the advocacy training or education training.
And that would be where I'm at, is with A and B, as they've stated with the pre or post.
Looks like we've got a surge. If this was a horse race, on A with a track with B, or some way to think about what goals can be supported around train the trainer. My question would be, who would be your target audience for that? Because one of the key questions here is, do you see then volunteers? And are volunteers going to be attracted to A and B? So speak a bit about who best can forward the big whys of options A and B.
Donna, before we do that, can someone help me understand what the difference with the option A, how is that different than the PILD conference that we have been doing the last few years?
Actually, I've been wondering the same thing, although I think there are some differences. They may be nuances more than real significant differences. I think what A does is it really causes us to focus on advocacy for decision makers. And there are a number of other things that I think are a part of PILD today that may become less important than the role that they play today. I'm not sure. Well, there are a couple. I'm trying to think. So what would they be? I don't know what our sessions with the NPLs, I'm not sure what role they would play in option A. I'm not sure what role the sessions that are all held at one time, that people apply to present at PILD, I don't know for sure what role they would play. It would, to me, option A is simply a more targeted advocacy for decision makers kind of conference, I think.
Thanks, Lila. And I'm certainly okay with it being very similar to what we have been doing, with a little bit of a different twist on it, because this exercise also reaffirms that what we've we shouldn't be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. What we've been doing has been good. It just needs to have some refocus to it.
I'm going to just add on to that. I think not only refocus, but fearlessness in cutting. Lila, I think you're right on target that it's a refocusing, but that, at least in my opinion, has to mean getting rid of the stuff that doesn't serve it. And the first part of that is, for me, getting rid of any poster session and presentation about what you're doing back home, unless it is about a particularly good advocacy strategy, as an example. Yeah.
And one more comment from me is that sometimes when groups have a number of options and we're all just talking here and deliberating, I like to follow up with a very quick survey that says, of these purposes that you talked about for option A, what would be your top 2 or 3? Because I do think there continues to need to be some discernment. So we've talked with one another and tried to label it, but there could be that follow-up. And I'll touch base with Bob and Lila and Karen and get their input with that. So with that, and mindful of the time, I want to turn it back to Karen and ask Karen to explain, and maybe Bob and Lila also, what you perceive as the next steps. We talked about a comment period, knowing that not everyone was available this afternoon. I make a commitment to get some draft materials back to you to take for comment. So Karen, as the chair of the PILD committee, maybe you can start and others can add.
Okay, thank you very much. And I want to thank everybody for your time today that you spent with all your input. And Donna Ray, thank you so much for providing leadership guidance in this facilitation. What our goal as the PIL committee, we needed to ensure that we have direction that we will be going in for 2020. What we're going to do is to take the information back to the committee and see if we can implement some of the items that we have so strongly stated that we should include. Our program committee will be looking at some of the information and seeing how we can put that in, as well as our media chairperson will be sending out different blurs throughout the year. We know that this is still a working document. We can't make all the changes in 2020, but it does give us some directions. And when I said directions, we will be working, I personally will be sending members of our committee information that you have provided for us, so will get us in the right mindset. Our first task as the PIL committee is to develop a theme, and I've asked people on the committee to give us suggestions of keynote speakers as well as keystone speakers. And I will also ask individuals that's on this call if there is someone or that you know that would be good at providing direction in a speech or presentation, if you would please forward the information to me so we can get started working on PIL 2020. Lala and Bob, if you'd like to contribute.
I'm just going to say that I will put the, I've recorded this and I'll put it up online and send a note to the group that were invited, because I know there were a number of people that were not able to come today, and this will give them an opportunity to tune in on the discussion that was there, and then also the notes that you shared, and I probably won't do it until I get your final wrap-up notes, Donna Ray, and I will share that with them too, so that we've got everybody has an opportunity to take advantage of what we've done today.
And the only additional comment that I would make is, and I haven't talked with either Bob or Karen about this, but it's difficult to try to plan for a conference when you're in the process of perhaps modifying and changing the conference. And so, I mean, clearly the decisions about PILD are JSEP's decisions. This is a JSEP conference, and clearly the decisions are JSEP's decisions. But I do wonder if we aren't trying to do too many things at one time. And so I wonder if we shouldn't, we're gonna have to quickly make some decisions about the 2020 conference that we have to have plans made for and the website up for by the end of this calendar year. And so I can't help but wonder if we shouldn't continue these conversations with the committee, but also we need to continue planning for the 2020 conference. And we may want to use this year as a kind of a transition year. In other words, go ahead and plan the conference as we know it for this year, taking into account everything that we've talked about, and also at the same time thinking about making these kinds of changes, especially if there are major changes with the 2021 conference. I put that out there as a possibility, because I know that these discussions have somewhat impeded your ability, Karen, to move forward with the 2020 conference. And so at some point, we're going to have to make a decision about that so that we can move on and get going for the 2020 conference.
I agree wholeheartedly.
And Lala, thank you for that, because I know, like I said, this was an ongoing discussion, and I know that there's going to be some other inputs. And I kind of agree with you. I would rather have a solid program, a solid strategic and policy how we're going to put this together versus trying to drive it and have some missteps for 2020. So I appreciate that, and I want to thank you. So we can kind of go back to the I will go back to the committee, and we will go forward as we ordinarily do. But just knowing letting everybody know on this call that this, I think, is a fluid document, a fluid process, because things may come up that we are not aware of, that we may consider because of the move that will be happening later this year. That might also be a part of our conversation a little later regarding PEAL for 2021.
The one comment that Allie made that I agree wholeheartedly with, and that is that we need to try to focus what we're doing on the goals that we're trying to accomplish with our concurrent sessions. This is about advocacy, education, and the strategies for doing those things that have been successful are the things that should be shared, not the fact that I had a wonderful program on, showing sheep or whatever it happened to be. That was a good comment, and I appreciated Allie making that comment.
Thank you. Sorry, this is Allie Mitchell. I'm just going to hop in for 1 second. And I appreciate the fact that it's hard to rebuild a car while you're driving it, for lack of a better metaphor. But it's also as simple as making decisions. And I know we don't want to make the wrong decision and go off on a path that isn't actually what the planning committee wants. But maybe because I'm the way that I work is a bit more make one choice and then move right on and just commit and go. But if we make a choice, and we make a choice within the next week, you could have a transformed PIL 2020. It's just whether or not you want to make the choice, or whether you feel it's appropriate and that there's enough time to make a choice that you're comfortable with. That's it.
So, speaking as somebody who's never been to the PILD conference, the ideas and the energy that we've done today and we've collected and the things that we brought forth, are they radically different than how the conference operates? I mean, we're all talking about advocacy and not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Are we making radical changes that would not be appropriate for 2020, or are they just kind of like just shaking things up a bit and keeping things that really work, getting rid of things that don't, and not having poster sessions talking about programs back in our state, but actually talking about the communication and advocacy. I didn't really think it was anything radically different, or I might be wrong.
One of the things that I picked up on is that it's not anything radically different, but I'm really excited by the idea that we could possibly be doing a train the trainer piece added onto it to give more value to the conference. And that will make it a lot easier for local extension professionals to sell this to their boards and to their leadership teams, that this is a valuable conference for us to be going to, and I will be bringing this back to utilize within the state.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a combination of tweaks and things that could be very different. I personally am really attracted to option B because it does offer the train the trainer kind of option, but we're going to have to spend some time really thinking that through and trying to figure out how to make that work and make it work right. That's going to take a little bit of time, and I don't, unless we have a group that really wants to focus on that right now among the committee, I'm not sure that we are prepared to incorporate that into the 2020 conference. There are some other things that are relatively simple to do, like Allie suggested, you know, and somebody else suggested, the poster sessions may not serve us well. Some of the sessions, individual sessions, may not serve us well. There are changes that are happening with NIFA and NIFA staff. They're not going to be in Washington, D.C. anymore, the NPLs. And so we may need to rethink that this year because they're not going to be there in 2020. And so I think it's a combination of things.
We are at our pledge time. So I so appreciate involvement with this very important work you're doing. And I do think the philosophical and the forward thinking we did today, I would just hold in terms of how impactful it will be and when, because when you start to think like this, and then there'll be a set of narratives to hone in, that we came to shared agreement around a big idea that will be impactful. But anyway, thank you so much for involving me in your committee meeting. And I am a one and done. So I wish you the best as you go forward.
Thank you so much for everyone.
Thank you, Donna.
Thanks all.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.